This week on Quadriga, Power and Democracy, Russia under Vladimir Putin. He's the man who will rule Russia for the foreseeable future. Russian Democrats had invested their hopes in the current president, Dmitry Medvedyev, but he announced last week that he was handing power back to his predecessor. Putin commands nearly 70% approval in public opinion polls. But will that support hold over another 6 or even 12 years? Russia's economy was hit hard by the financial crisis. Corruption is rife. Challenges await. Can the once and future president master them? Your host, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga, the international talk show on DW TV. What will Putin's return to the Kremlin mean for Russia and for the world? That's what we want to talk about today with three people who've been following events in Russia closely.
Alexander Rahr is the leading expert on Russia at the German Council on Foreign Relations, as well as the author of biographies on Mikhail Gorbachev and Vladimir Putin. His latest work, published in German, is entitled The Cold Friend: Why We Need Russia. Sergei Lagodinsky was born in Russia. A fellow at the Berlin-based Global Public Policy Institute, he is a frequent commentator on the Russian TV network RTVI and also works as an associate at the law firm Orrick, Hülters and Elsing. Lucian Kim is based in Russia, where he has worked for the Moscow Times and Bloomberg News. He is currently writing a book on the Putin era. He previously served as the Berlin correspondent for the Christian Science Monitor, covering the conflicts in Kosovo and Afghanistan.
Alexander Rahr, do you think that a real power struggle has occurred between Dmitry Medvedyev and Vladimir Putin, or was this a foregone deal?
I think it was a foregone deal, because they had their own deal in 2007 when Putin couldn't be elected a third time. He couldn't violate the constitution. So he chose his most loyal servant, his assistant Medvedev, to take the place for him for 4 years. I think it's obvious now.
Sergei Lagodinsky, what are you hearing from friends and family back in Russia? Is anybody very surprised, or did they all think this is what would happen?
No, they're not surprised. They're just, there was an op-ed in, I think, International Herald Tribune by this writer, Yerofeev, and he described this situation. He brought his daughter to the kindergarten, and he came home, then he heard that Putin's next president, and he went shopping. It's just, I would say it's like in the northern countries, there are two seasons, winter and summer, so there is a Medvedev season, Putin season, and then they change, and that's how life is.
But Lucian Kim, there were some reports of something that looked like a power struggle this week, the very abrupt dismissal by President Medvedev of Finance Minister Alexei Kudrin, who had been viewed as indispensable. What was going on there?
Well, that's a subject for some intense debate right now in Russia. The problem is the system is so opaque that it's very difficult to always tell exactly what's happening. One theory says that Kudrin also was interested in becoming prime minister, and that Medvedev was given the prime ministership sort of as a consolation prize, and Kudrin, a very competent finance minister, said that he would not work in a future government. So it seems like there was emotions at play, but it's very hard to tell exactly what were the real reason behind it, and I think this is a bigger problem in Russian politics.
Alexander Rahr, where does that bigger problem point? Could we be in for a bumpy transition nonetheless?
It depends, I think, on the world economic crisis, on how Russia will continue to get out of this crisis. Well, maybe the dismissal of Kudrin was the first sign that also problems occur in Russia. But I agree with Kim that Kudrin himself had a lot of ambitions. He wanted to become prime minister. And he couldn't criticize acting president Medvedev in this way as he did, because that would have ruined the authority of the president completely. So Medvedev had to act. He acted the same way with, remember, a year ago with Lushkov, when the Moscow mayor also attacked Medvedev and said, I'm obeying also the Prime Minister Putin. Medvedev is nothing for me. And then he had to fire him. The same way now, he had to fire Kudrin, otherwise he would lose every kind of standing, international standing. And this will be the problem for Medvedev, to rule the country until May next year, because until then he will formally be president. He would have to take very important decisions. The other way out of the situation is that he would, ruling together with Putin and all the foreign leaders who would come to Russia in the next 6 months, would see Putin and Medvedev. But it would be ridiculous. So in a way, we are running towards a very interesting time, because some decisions have to be made. And again, the financial crisis is there. Russia has survived it well, but it has challenges in front of it. Especially it has to get rid of this power vertical. It has to create a middle-range economy. It has to globalize itself. It has to become a member of the WTO. It has to continue working with the European Union on energy issues. A lot of problems have occurred. Russia and the EU, for example, don't have a partnership and cooperation agreement for 5 years. They are stuck in a kind of cooperation. That has to change, and this is a duty of the next president, if not Medvedev, to change it as soon as possible.
Alexander Rau, you just talked about that tandem, Medvedev and Putin, and put the very interesting hypothetical that possibly in this transition we might even experience them as a double team. Let's take a look back at how that tandem got its start.
New Year's Eve 1999. The ailing President Boris Yeltsin resigns and declares Vladimir Putin his successor. By the time Putin's elected 4 months later, he has already fired corrupt politicians and cemented his image as a leader with an iron fist. In the years thereafter, he consolidates state power over the economy by driving out the oligarchs and taking control of the oil and gas industry. Gazprom head Medvedyev is appointed chief of staff and prime minister under Putin. The tandem takes a new and surprising turn in 2004 when Putin, prevented by the constitution from serving a third term as president, hands over the office to Medvedyev and takes over his post as prime minister. At the outset, Medvedyev talks the talk of a modernizer, while Putin cultivates the image of a stabilizer.
Lucian Kim, does Dmitry Medvedyev being shunted aside mean a real defeat for a true prospect of reform, or was there never really any to begin with?
It depends on how you define the word reform. If we're talking about the actual system, are we talking about the system, democratic system in Russia, or are we talking about sort of a larger project of reforming the economy? And so in some ways, it's a big disappointment for people who hope that there would be some democratization in Russia, the fact that Putin is returning and that Medvedev never really had a chance. As far as reform in the sense of sort of bringing Russia into the globalized economy, that might be a little bit more positive, because Putin is not a retrograde leader in that sense, and he fully wants to bring Russia into the 21st century.
Sergei Lagodinsky, we're constantly told that Putin has a whole lot of popular support, 70% apparently in the current public opinion polls. But how deep and steadfast is that support, and where is it coming from? Could it begin to get a little shaky if things don't go well?
I don't think so, because look at the situation that we had. We had a situation where Putin was actually the one responsible for technical decisions. He was responsible, and if you look at it from a pragmatic analytical point of view, he switched from a very presidential, statesman-like role as a president to a role where he was, in fact, every day responsible for the economic situation in Russia. The economic situation in Russia is not the best compared to many years that we had before, and still he is more popular than the presidential Medvedev now. He has 69%, despite the little rochet that we've experienced today. And Medvedev is also still at 62 or 64%.
So where's that coming from? What is it that the people love about Putin?
I think that it's not just what they love about Putin, it's also what they didn't like about the 1990s. It's a reaction to the fatigue of the democracy as they experienced it, which they equate with chaos chaos, and add to this the historical predisposition of Russians who actually never have experienced a functioning democracy and always had some figure, whether as a czar or a communist leader, who was the one with an iron fist, who was the one responsible for their stability. And here we go. That's what we have now.
Lucien Kim, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, well, just many people talk about Putin's popularity, and I think one thing also to keep in mind is that it's not really an active electorate which is cheering him on. It's much more of a sort of a passive approval of what he's doing. And I think there is a difference, and I think this also helps explain the reaction that Sergei was discussing in Russia right after the announcement on Saturday. No one really cared. It's much more it was taken for granted. It was much more of a passive reaction because people don't feel like they're really taking part in the political process anyway.
This is true, but there is also no alternative to Putin. Unfortunately, I know that it's a little politically incorrect to say so, because we can always argue, yes, there are enough politicians who would like to sit in front of cameras and tell what they think and propose alternatives. But unfortunately, maybe I will sound a little bit provocative, but these Democrats who today, liberal politicians who represent this liberal flank in Russia, have been compromised because of the 90s. They were all in power. Nemtsov, Ryzhkov, Kasyanov, they were all in power and didn't produce anything, didn't deliver, and ran away when Russia was collapsing again in 99 and 2000. And therefore, in many ways, people stopped trusting them. The only hope for the liberals is now Mr. Yavlinsky, who is over 60. He will participate in the parliamentary elections, and I hope, sincerely hope, that he will get enough support to enter with his party, Yabloko, the next Duma. But I have my doubts about this, because even in the free election, I think even Medvedev and Putin wants him to be in the Duma, because they need a small but still influential liberal voice of Yavlinsky. But still he will not be elected, because the people are fed up with his ideas, unfortunately.
So I'm hearing you say the support is based on the fact that there aren't many alternatives, that people are perhaps in some sense a bit jaded, a bit passive, and also very much remember those bumpy 90s. What could change that equation, Sergei Lagodinsky? Somebody mentioned a moment ago the economy as a very major variable. What about this corruption that is apparently so rife that Dmitry Medvedyev had talked about combating, but clearly has not managed to get under control?
Well, corruption is definitely one point, but again, for people who grew up in a situation like that, for them it's like a state of nature, and they are just looking for ways of how to engage with the corrupt officials or corrupt businessmen. But I think what really could change this situation, the equation, is internet. When you talked about opposition leaders like Yavlinsky, etc., come on, Yavlinsky, nobody takes him seriously anymore. Yavlinsky has actually, dismantled himself throughout his political career. He is not taken seriously as an alternative. But we have grassroots initiatives like Alexei Navalny, like many others, who are in the internet and who do have, because internet is not that easy to control, do have appeal to a broader, younger population. The problem is Russia is not a very young country. It's not Iran, where you have a huge young generation. It's actually it's an aging country, and many more people get their information through TV. But yet, this internet, the new communications, and an ability to actually bring also critical content through these ways, they also set under pressure the normal, usual media, and that's what we're seeing today on TV or in mainstream newspapers. You do see more critical and more open analysis of the situation that we're seeing, and I think partly because the internet is actually bringing them to this.
Lucien Kim, from your research that you've been doing in Russia, also you, Alexander Rau, you're there frequently. Do you think that's right? Is there the potential for a Russian spring, perhaps not with very young people, but medium young?
If I may continue to what Sergei just said, he's right, but somewhere he's also a little bit wrong. Where I'm participating in a lot of discussions in the internet. And I'm really frustrated. I must tell you, the majority of blogs where I go to are being occupied by nationalistic and sometimes schizophrenic and chauvinistic people who still deplore the end of the Soviet Union, who are very hostile to the West, who are aggressive. And I will again be a little bit provocative in saying that maybe, I mean, I know it's very difficult to say so in the West, but maybe it's good that we have someone like Putin who at least keeps the political center intact. And the alternative to Putin is not a liberal politician, but it could be a far worse politician from the far right who would have enough popular support, like Zhirinovsky, who also grew older, in order to take power in Russia. And that would be a horrible scenario for the West.
Lucien Kim, where are those kind of resentments, that kind of reactionary nationalism? Where's that coming from? Russia's been enjoying a resource-fueled boom for quite some time. Shouldn't that make people a little bit more relaxed and confident?
Well, I think actually the resource fueled boom has contributed to some of this feeling of getting, as they say in Russia, getting off its knees and standing up straight again. So I think it actually might have added to some of this patriotic feeling. Of course, Putin is often quoted as saying that the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century, and he is often criticized for that, especially in view of World War II before that. But I think for his generation, it is important to remember that a whole world and a whole empire collapsed, and that this scarred many people, and so I think everybody needs a way of overcoming their resentments, and some of these are looking back before communism, looking at the Russian Empire, and sort of satisfying their frustrations through nationalism and chauvinism.
I'd like to take a closer look at the Russian economy. It's often said to suffer from what economists call a resource curse.
Oil and gas reserves have long kept Russia's economy gushing, supporting enviable rates of growth. What happens to the earnings? That's up to the Kremlin alone. Putin, himself an economist, presided over the consolidation of a system of state capitalism in which the Kremlin uses oil revenues to keep inefficient industries afloat. But many of these are long since unable to compete. Russia protects them from foreign rivals with high tariffs. The economy is in desperate need of productive investment, but investors from abroad are often put off by massive corruption, bureaucracy, and uneven application of the rule of law.
Sergei Lagodinsky, the boom has shown some signs of stagnating. How worried are people about the economy, and how much of a variable is it?
Just recently, I think in Vedomosti there was a front page article about many Russians urgently investing their money in London real estate. There is an unease also. I was in Moscow last week. I talked to people. There is an unease about the upcoming economic difficulties, and many people, especially those who were able to accumulate some wealth, are thinking about how to secure their assets. So it is a problematic time now, and we'll see how it plays out, especially with this transition in power. What we know is that with Medvedev staying, in case he does stay as a prime minister on top of things, we will probably have hope in all these new projects where they are thinking about promoting new industries like Skolkovo or other projects where we do have some hope. But again, it's also a lot about education system in Russia. It's about a general spirit of entrepreneurship in Russia. It's not just about someone coming from the top and saying to the bottom, you have to invest in that and that and that industry. It's a systemic challenge, and it's a huge one.
Alexander, you were nodding your head when the report mentioned Putin consolidating state capitalism. where do you think he'll go when he comes back to the Kremlin? He's been through several incarnations as president before. Which Putin do you think we're likely to see this time?
I'll tell you what I think. But first, a word in favor of state capitalism. For the Soviet Union, of course, it was a bad thing. For Russia, after the experience of the 90s, it was, from my point of view, really very important to get a certain kind of strategic assets under state control in order to make them run again. For example, nanotechnologies, or even the oil and gas sector. Forgive me, but I think it was a lot of people are plundering this. The Western companies received a lot of privileges in the 90s when nobody wanted to invest in Russia. And 10 years later, a lot of corrections had to be done in order to make this, again, smooth. Now it's time to get rid of the state holdings again. But for a time, I think they were necessary simply to invest in areas in which private investors didn't want to invest. And so I think that Putin will come back not as a dictator, and also not as a liberal modernizer like we have seen them, by the way, in 2000, 2001, 2002, when his prime minister was Kasyanov, who did a lot of very important and useful things, including legitimization of private property for the first time in Russian history. So in my mind, there will, and hope, there will be a liberal-minded Medvedev at the helm of the government, with a couple of very important ministers, like Dvorkovich, for example, who works for him now, maybe Shuvalov, maybe Kudrin, a second Kudrin will, Gref may come back. Those people who are in favor of market economy, and hopefully Putin will let them go, and I think he will let them go, because he has no other choice. Europe is the future of Russia, so the social market system is the future of Russia, not the Soviet Union.
Lucien Kim, it's not unusual for a television show based in Germany that we focused a lot of attention on Russia and its economic relations, but it is perhaps unusual if you were looking at this from a North American perspective. There, the first question would be, what does this mean for the reset?
I think for the reset, Putin was always behind the reset anyway. Medvedev did not pursue an independent foreign policy. He was sort of the smiling face of the Putin regime during his presidency. So it was very convenient for Obama, when Obama came to power, that he could deal with someone like Medvedev instead of Putin, who has a poor reputation in the West. And
they got along quite well, apparently, Medvedyev.
I think they did have there's evidence that they had a good personal rapport. And they met many, many times. In fact, Medvedev might be the foreign leader that Obama met the most. I think what's the danger for the reset is probably more in the U.S. than it is in Russia, and that's because now that it's clear, more or less clear, who will be the Russian president in 2012, the real question is who will be the U.S. president, and it's clear that the Republicans in the U.S. will use Putin's return as ammunition to show that Obama should never have been dealing with the Russians, so to speak.
Sergei Lagudinsky, what do you think about pluralism at home in Russia? I asked before, which Putin are we likely to see when he does return to the Kremlin? He has been through different incarnations. One thing we know from the past is that he tends to crack down when he's feeling under threat. Could that be one of the faces we're likely to see?
Well, as we mentioned, we never know. What is important to remember is that there are many Putins, and that we didn't have just a gray period under this president or prime minister. We actually, what we are experiencing now in Russian media and Russian civil society is a sort of a more relaxed approach to a more open approach. There are voices which are being voiced, or opinions that are being channeled, which you couldn't imagine to hear a year ago, for example. But again, we are in the middle of an election campaign to Duma, or before an election campaign to Duma, and we are under President Medvedev, so we don't know what is the real power equation there. And when we have Putin back in power, we cannot predict. Many people know him as a person, and many people know that he's very complicated in terms of remembering very well all the scars and all the traumas that others people role brought to him. But again, he's also a statesman, and I think he is a very smart, intelligent person, and he would see that Russia today is not a Russia 5 years ago or 6 years ago when he was the last time he was president, and that especially with new technologies, with Euro, and with China growing stronger and stronger, he will have to find a new balance and not just to replicate what he used to do as a president before.
Alexander Rau, you don't have much time, unfortunately. You do know the man. What do you think has changed most, and how will that change his next term?
I think he's intelligent enough to understand that the world is moving very fast, and he has to make Russia according to these new rules which are being established.
Meaning?
Meaning that he will, I think, a lot of very positive signals at the very beginning of this presidency to the West in order to charm the West again.
Very interesting prediction. We'll see if it comes true. Thank you so much to all of you for being with us here today, and thanks to you out there for tuning in.